I wondered, if I was going to tell a Conan story, when in his life would I set it? What would he be up against? I wanted to put the Barbarian into a desperate situation that simply got worse. I mean, take a cue from the horror yarns that appeared in Weird Tales. I wanted to plunge Conan into a Lovecraftian nightmare. I don't want to lean into spoilers by having the plague become more sentient and begin to ponder its role in the world, what it is, where it is, what it's supposed to do, what's its destiny.
Hello, my fellow barbarians. I'm Sean Curley, and welcome to the Conan the Barbarian podcast. Like and subscribe. Come on, guys. Seriously, if you haven't done it already, do it. Today's guest is one of the nicest people I've ever had the pleasure of speaking to and meeting. I actually had the opportunity to meet him in person in Cross Plains, Texas. That's right, I just got back from Howard days. As you can see, I got myself a souvenir shirt. There's Robert E. Howard's home and Conan himself. Texas was amazing. I got to meet Jeff Shanks, Jim Zub, Mark Finn, Bill Cavalier. Quick shout out to my guy Lion from Hobbies of a Man. Go check him out. Really cool dude. So Howard Days was absolutely incredible, and we will have video evidence proof of that in these next couple of months. Boy, do I have a lot to edit. June 18th, big day, because that will mark the release of Conan in the City of the Dead. There it is, folks. Look at this beautiful cover. This is two stories in one. Now, today I am interviewing John C. Hocking. He is the author of this book, and this is a project 30 years in the making. It collects Conan and the Emerald Lotus, which was first published in 1995, and its long-awaited sequel, Conan and the Living Plague. Now, Conan and the Living Plague was written in the 90s, but never saw a release. Fast forward to about a couple years ago, Heroic Signatures decided to finally, at long last, dust off this story and give it a proper release. John C. Hocking is an author who truly has a grasp on that Weird Tales pulp essence, and it really comes across in these two stories. This interview with John was so great that it ended up going on like 3 hours, and we ended up talking about creature features and sci-fi and horror for at least an hour, and unfortunately none of that is in this episode, but perhaps if you're lucky and you're interested in hearing non-Conan related stuff, we may release that down the line. Anyway, without further ado, my fellow barbarians, I give you John C. Hocking.
I have a lot to say. The Conan character video was excellent, man. This was an order of magnitude superior. A bunch of well-read, well-spoken people saying intelligent things about Conan. It was great.
Thank you so much, man. That means the world to me, especially coming from you.
Well, it's only the truth.
I'm so excited to talk about this release, but I want to first start off, and this is what I ask all my guests. How did you first discover Conan?
Long, long ago, when I was but a little guy, I was a little kid, and I was a very precocious reader. My father was a teacher, taught high school art and history, and he gave me the paperbacks that were coming out back then. There's a lot of stuff in the 60s, early 70s, where the stuff that was published back in the pulp magazines of the 20s, 30s were being reissued in paperback, and my dad, who'd read those out of the pulp magazines, would pick up the paperbacks and bring them back. And one day he brought me, this was a long time ago, my friend, the Lancer Conan the Adventurer, which is the one with the classic Frazetta cover. Conan atop the pile of bodies, lovely lady clinging to his knee, huge skull in the background. My dad, being an art teacher, was blown away by that cover. I'm pretty sure he bought it for the cover alone. But, he read it and he gave it to me, and it blew my head off. I mean, I was a little guy, and I read People of the Black Circle, and I was staggered. It changed the way I read. It changed the way I looked at things. And ever since then, man, I've been on board the Conan train. I read the pastiches as they came out. I got into the comic a little late because, I wasn't sure if it could be as good as the prose. Comics were for kids. But I learned otherwise before too long. And yeah, I've been with Conan for a very long time, since the late 60s, in fact.
My dad also gave me that exact same book. It was from his collection. He had all of those Lancers with the Frazetta covers.
Awesome.
And it also blew my mind as well. And the covers definitely drew me in. Emerald Lotus was published in 1995, and you worked on it for 3 years. So I assume you started working on it around 1992-ish, 1993-ish?
I think 93. I just started poking around with it. You have to consider the fact that I was kind of doing it to entertain myself. I started off looking at it almost like a game. Like I would sit around, and I didn't foresee myself writing an entire novel and finishing it. I just wanted to play with the idea. Having read so much Conan and gotten into it so much, I wondered, if I was going to tell a Conan story, when in his life would I set it? What would he be up against? And it evolved from there until I finally had a finished book.
Let's talk about the time kind of leading up to that and what led to that decision to just go out and write your own Conan story.
To be completely blunt, I found the pastiches to be kind of uneven, and a lot of them were missing the sort of weird tales, supernatural horror flavor that I really thought that I really missed. I missed that when it was missing from Conan. And I imagined, we should pit Conan against a more interesting supernatural menace than we're seeing in the pastiche, or most of the pastiche at the time. And that helped spur me on to do it. But like I said, that I didn't sit down and go, I'm going to write me a Conan novel. It sort of happened by accretion. The various ideas built up relatively slowly until I had like a complete plot laid out in my mind and various scenes I wanted to put in, and there it was. After a couple of years, it was complete.
Give us a little bit more of the background of that story and how you came up with it.
After the events in Queen of the Black Coast, Conan makes his way up to north through the Hyborian landscape and ends up in Sham, where he becomes a mercenary. And the Lancers is in the city of Icaria. And I basically thought that, okay, that's a pretty good spot. And I poked around and couldn't find any other pastiche, comics or otherwise, that really had him there. And it's about a year of his life, give or take, was more or less open. And I thought, okay, that's a good spot for me to set it. And I wanted to come up with a different sort of sorceress menace. And so I conceived of the Emerald Lotus. It's a otherworldly plant discovered by a sort of a lowly wizard who wants to make something of himself. The plant is kind of a predatory fungus, but its leaves can yield a powerful sorcerous drug that can enable a wizard to increase his power. But of course, there's a terrible price. And the villain has plans to use the lotus as sort of to addict other wizards and bring them under his control. But he's so busy using the lotus that he hardly even gets around to it. It's a powerful intoxicant and unleashes the worst elements of a person's personality. That's
so cool. Well, I'm really glad that you're super into the magic of the Hyborian age. I talked to Jeff Shanks, and he totally blew my mind by making me think about magic in the Hyborian age more as like an archaic technology. And so I try to think of every wizard, it's like an ancient technology, or maybe that plant may have come from space or somewhere else. What are the origins to you of like the Emerald Lotus? Did you think about?
Well, yeah, if in the story you can find out that the Cetrus, wizard of ancient Stygia, basically bargained with the dark gods to acquire the Emerald Lotus. At least that's what the legends say. And you should read you can get all the information out of the book itself. But yeah, it definitely the actual origins of the plant. At one point, the villain of the piece, Etherim Fowl, sits and wonders, this is a strange thing. It defies the laws of nature. It's an ambulatory fungus. It yields it's not something of this world. Where did it come from? And there's this sort of Lovecraftian sense of the unknown, of that the supernatural is a little bit beyond the fathoming of normal people, that it is innate. It is by its very nature unnatural and foreign to this world and what we know. So yeah, it has a deliberately slightly foggy origins.
Well, you're such a fan and a scholar of pulp fiction era stories and magazines. I can see the influence of Howard and Lovecraft in your writing. Let's elaborate on that Lovecraft connection and these Lovecraftian level threats that are kind of painted in the background in the tapestry of your stories. What are some of the most influential Lovecraft stories that you've read, and how did you kind of weave those elements into these stories?
I touched on Lovecraftian elements by way of Howard, and Howard always had that sort of the sorcery in Howard stories tends to be unnatural and strange and reach outside of the human world and is a corrupting influence. There's a cost for it, and it's never positive. Mm. So you can be sorceress, but you could be a sorcerer. You can work wizardry, but it's a dangerous practice, and it's drawn from outside the human sphere. So I was able to anytime I touched on sorcery, I wanted it to be a little bit weird, a little bit strange, and to cost something. And in terms of like what Lovecraft stories were specifically influential, I mean, I like virtually all of Lovecraft stuff. I'm a big fan of At the Mountains of Madness. The Dunwich Horror, I think a lot of hardcore Lovecraftians kind of, don't necessarily esteem that one, but strikes me as an absolutely frightening supernatural horror story. But I like most of his stuff. If you've read Pickman's Model, you'll see direct Lovecraft influence in Conan and the Living Plague.
Wow, yeah.
I'll say no more.
Yeah, no spoilers, right? Let's get right into the follow-up novel, The Living Plague. So I know this was written a while ago, and we have a copy right here. Can you talk about the process of completing this and finally getting this published with City of the Dead?
It's a wonderful thing to see that thing finally published. It's been through the mill. It's almost published in 97, almost published in 2019. It's so good to, have it in my hand and see it is going to be available. When I finished Lotus and it was accepted and was regarded as, a worthy sort of a Conan pastiche, I did feel I had more stories about Conan to tell. I mean, writing about the Cimmerians of privilege, it's an honor. And for me, it was a hell of a lot of fun. I didn't chip away at Emerald Lotus over the course of a few years because it was a labor. It was like my hobby. It was more fun than, rather than watch TV or even read, I might sit down and scratch my head wondering what Conan was going to do next. One of the things I hope for most is that some of the pleasure I felt in writing about the Barbarian is accessible, is there on the page for the reader to see and absorb. Hope that some of the fun is there. And for two, actually harkening back to Lovecraft question, I want to put the Barbarian into a desperate situation that simply got worse. Take a cue from the horror yarns that appeared in Weird Tales and, the Pulp magazine way back in the day. Weird Tales is basically stories of supernatural horror. And Conan fit right in. Howard's Conan is often, every time pretty much, involved in stories that involve at least a little supernatural horror. And I wanted to take it that extra mile. I wanted to plunge Conan into a Lovecraftian nightmare and take it as far as it could go and then show how he prevails, because that's what Conan does.
Did Heroic Signatures reach out to you? Did you reach out to them? What was that process?
Actually, they reached out to me. It's a long and convoluted story, but I wrote it back in the day and it was accepted, and then the character was sold. And the new owners of Conan were more interested in doing a sort of a remastered version of the original Conan stories, which is a fabulous idea, except that it left my story kind of out in the cold for a while. So all more power to him for actually remembering it all these years later and finally bringing it into print. I basically thought that it was, I might as well just stick it in the drawer. I thought it was kind of over for a while there. But yeah, they reached out and gave me and tapped me for it. So
can you talk about the time between when you finished writing it all the way up until when it got published? Was it just sitting in the drawer? Did you let friends read it?
Dude, I got to be honest. I was crestfallen. I thought I was going to, the way things went with Lotus and then the immediate acceptance of my second Conan pastiche, I anticipated that I would at least have the opportunity to write Conan again and again. And maybe even again, I plotted out 6 novels. And, having to let go of that, realized that, no pastiche was forthcoming and that, my services were not needed. That was a bitter pill to swallow. And so I basically took Conan off out of my mind. When they knocked on my door looking for Living Plague, I didn't have it. It was on an old thumb drive, literally dusty in my basement. And I was like, is it still on this? Is it still here? And, I still had it. And I looked at it. There we have it. It's hard to believe, but that's all true, man.
Many Conan fans say that you're one of the best pastiche novel writers out there for Conan. You wrote this as a fan. You wrote what you wanted to see. You wrote what was missing from these pastiche novels.
I wrote what I thought was missing.
Exactly.
And you can say that my Conan stuff has been well approved, but you don't have to look too far to find those that are not fond of it. There are Conan fans that aren't, big Emerald Lotus fans. It's true fact. Don't deny it. I'm pleased that it's done as well as it has and that people regard it well. What I wanted to do, I think, if you strip everything else away, is basically reestablish connections to not just to Howard's originals, but to Weird Tales magazine, to bring that supernatural thrust back into the Conan stories with a vengeance. And if I did anything right, I think that would probably be it.
How do you handle the feedback of fans?
Well, you're supposed to ignore all that sort of stuff. But it's next to impossible, especially since Lotus was my first novel and the first thing I had published that reached any sort of an audience, like a widespread audience, national, global. You know, I got letters from Poland and Germany, and people loved Conan, and they read my book. When it first landed, this was at the dawn of the internet, so like 95,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
and I just basically got online, and turns out that, of course, at that point in time, it was a dark time for Robert E. Howard, because all of his original Conan stories were out of print. If you wanted to read Conan, you read Pastiche, and I mean, obviously that's more than problematic, but, you know, by offering a pastiche in that particular environment, I got a good number of, I mean, if you want to talk about the negative things that were said, I got a good number of poison letters, you know, basically saying, how dare you write a pastiche for this guy? You know, you are not Robert E. Howard, you know, you are a hack and ghoul filching silver from the pockets of Robert E. Howard's corpse, which sounds, dude, I seriously got comments that were in that particular leak, some of them even worse. So I always take the praise with a grain of salt, because I know that there's those out there that are not in favor of pastiche, and they're not necessarily enamored of my own work. Fine, that's, you know, if you don't want to read pastiche or you don't like my stuff, that's only natural. I would encounter that. I was pleased, however, with those that were able to like read it and check out all the references that I packed into it. It took a long time for some of them still haven't really surfaced. Emerald Lotus in particular, because I was writing it to please myself, is almost Joycean in the sheer level of, you know, like pulp references to Howard, Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, you know, other pastiche that I admired. You know, it's pretty much laden with that sort of stuff. And if you look, you know, there's a whole bunch of funky little Easter eggs in there if you care to find them.
Well, give us one of those Easter eggs. Tell us just one. Spoil one Easter egg.
Oh, well, any time a sorcerer breaks into a chant, you can pretty much be sure that whatever is written in italics has some connection to other sorceress magic, and sometimes it's going to be it might even be in a comic. I'd offer a couple of real covert nods to Roy Thomas's run on Conan the Barbarian comic, and you know it's not Howard, but I always appreciated Thomas's work, and so there's a bunch of covert nudges to him in there, and you can find those without too much difficulty.
I find tremendous joy reading pastiche novels. There's so much love for this character that keeps the spirit alive. During the time that you wrote Emerald Lotus, those original Conan stories hadn't really been published in a long time, like unedited, like true Howard. So I feel like there was a lot of negativity floating around at that time. I think it was just like you got caught up in it. And now we have all those original stories out there. We have Howard's unedited works. People can maybe circle back and give this another shot if they didn't like it at the time, because I feel like, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with passing on Conan and passing that torch. We've got some great works of fiction out there from it.
I was so interested in Conan and what was being done with the character. I read all the Tors. I have all the Tor pastiches. Even if the story didn't totally mesh with me, I still wanted to see what they were doing with the character and where he was going and what was getting published. What were they doing with Conan? And so, yeah, I'm game for pastiche. I don't think any of it, I don't see how you can think of any of it as canon except for Robert E. Howard's work. I'm just interested in, if there's a pastiche, how does it connect to Howard's? How aware of Conan's stories is it? And does it try to make any sort of connection to it or offer some sort of tribute to it? I always kept a keen eye open for that. And if I saw it, it made me happy.
Can you talk a little bit about Robert E. Howard and his influence on your writing style?
Well, I knew right away that I couldn't really duplicate Howard's work, and nor did I really want to. Trying to write in that particular style, it's for almost anybody. I think Scott Oden might be the exception. That guy can pretty much mirror Howard's style, but I didn't feel like I could write prose like that. So I tried to write sort of a juiced up, you know, colorful, action prose that would be suitable that would have been suitable for Weird Tales if it wasn't Howard. There's some bits and pieces of Howard's style Howard's prose that I don't know have really been examined all that closely or regarded with the sort of respect that they might be. You dropped me a note early on, and the questions you might ask me at this, I'm going to dip into that a little early with this because a couple of the things about Howard's style, he was able to do world building in a fascinating fashion that's almost impossible to duplicate. That was the only aspect of, I think, his prose style that I really worked to try to have some sort of similar approach. He's able to lay out delicate brushstrokes about in the background while the story hurtles along that made the Hyborian age come to life. So I tried to do that. A lot of modern fantasy basically the story will slow while there's just an explosion of world building, and people love that. And in the hands of a master, Tolkien, Martin, like that, it's grand, it's immersive. I didn't see a Conan story as a place to do that. I didn't think, even if though the Hyborian age is vivid and deep, it's not, you can't stop a Conan story in order to talk about, the society or whatnot. You need, the story needs to move, man. It's, Howard had that masterful pulp thrill, drive. He had narrative drive, which I think narrative drive and pacing is probably the chief difference between, sword and sorcery as a genre and fantasy as a whole. It's not necessarily you need to have violent action every page or every other page. The story has to keep unfolding. It has to keep happening. Events change. It has to keep, and Howard nailed that. And that I tried to maintain pace, tried to keep things going at a brisk clip, and I tried to brush in the world building. The other things like Howard's poetry, so his weird veiled sense of tragedy. I didn't even really try too hard to get those because I think it would have felt forced. I sure as hell couldn't have done his poetry.
Well, that's impossible to replicate. Like you said, it's a brisk pace. It's definitely a challenge to be able to paint the tapestry of the Hyborian Age without getting into the nuances and getting off track. That's what people love about the old pulp stories so much, is that it gets you right into the action and never lets go.
Yeah, that stuff was born out of the pit of the Great Depression and pre-television. So Joe Average would pick up a pulp magazine and he would fully anticipate that what he read would grab him by the neck and tow him right into the narrative. At its, what it's like at its best when you're reading and everything goes away. Like all of a sudden it's like you wake up and it's like, what time is it? How did I get on page 137? You know what I mean? And Howard had that down. And I don't know how much modern fiction really strives for that sort of full on immersive, pacing to carry you in, carry you right through. I don't know how much it does that, but that's something we're trying to emulate. And because it's can be done in different styles of prose, I hope to see more of that in fiction in general and in Pastiche in particular.
Well, give us some more, John. Let's write those other 5 planned sequels you got. I'll be there. I'll be the first to read them.
Dude, it took 27 years for The Living Plague to come to press. So
yeah, but now we got our shit together. We're ready.
All right.
While we're on the subject of those Conan stories, you mentioned Queen of the Black Coast earlier. Tell us about some of your favorite Conan stories, original Robert E. Howard Conan stories.
Queen of the Black Coast is up there. I still have a really strong affection for People of the Black Circle. It has just about everything that a good sword and sorcery or a good Conan story in general has just all sort of webbed right into it. It has one of the best examples of frightening sorcery ever, where where the one of the masters of Yimsha lifts up a hand and says, "I think I'll take your heart, Karam Shah." And Karam Shah's chest erupts and into his hand comes his heart. It's just a horrifying, brutal display of sorcery that is shocking. It's the supernatural is brutal as a blow of an axe. And you don't usually get, there's no airy, fairy, magical unicorns in there. The sorcery's terrifying. And so, that sticks with me. That's a wonderful story.
That story definitely makes you wonder if Spielberg and Lucas had picked up a copy of that and with Temple of Doom.
That's the other. Yeah, you can trace a lot of Howard elements have sort of spilled out into other films and whatnot. They're the swiping little scenes and little bits and pieces, little quotes. It's powerful stuff. It lends itself to that, I'm afraid.
I feel like People of the Black Circle would be a really cool movie.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a few Howard stories that you're like Tower of the Elephant, People of the Black Circle, Queen of the Black Coast would probably be the easiest to adapt. But what would you like to see happen with the next Conan movie or TV show?
Okay, that right there is a challenge. They were going to make an animated version of Red Nails. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Ron Perlman was going to voice Conan.
I'm sure that would have been fine, but they got the right artists to work behind it with it. Michael Kaluta, a couple other really notable characters that are doing backgrounds and whatnot. I bet even if they did the live action, since so much of it takes place indoors, they'd be paying for some sets, but they could go film noir on it and have it be shadowy and save a few dollars that way, get some CGI in there. But there's not a whole lot of super duper special effects that they could do. And that's a mighty story. It may be a little dark for modern audiences, but that's a powerful story.
Yeah, I think they actually recorded they even recorded the audio for it, I think they recorded Ron Perlman's lines. I think Mark Hamill was in it too. he had been cast?
I don't know. I'd pay to hear that audio, though. That would be fabulous.
Well, we'll see what we can do. I don't know. Who knows? I doubt we'll ever see the light of day for that.
Yeah,
but I know there's at least some images of it online.
It needs the visual aspect that gives it more than just focused on the Conan character, but something to pan back and let you see something of the Hyborian age. Casting is problematic. I mean, it's really difficult to follow in Arnold Schwarzenegger's shoes, which you sort of have to. You have to do. You can't ignore that. But if the story was based more on like a Howardian, I'd love to see it based on actual Howard stories or a fusion of a couple of them together. And the focus would go more for the Tower of the Elephant, which is, if I had to name another favorite Conan story, I mean, I love all of them, but that story is about as close to myth as any fiction written in the 20th century. It feels timeless, and you could make a hell of a movie out of that, even if it was only part of the movie. And I don't think that's that particular aspect of it where, Conan encounters this really alien creature and offers it a level of compassion. I don't think that's necessarily something you've gotten out of any movie about Conan so far. And it'd be great to get, a wider view of both the character and his world on film.
What you said earlier about these old pulp stories, doing a good job of painting the world, but not getting caught up in it and just keeping the story moving forward and kind of starting off right with the action. Conan's there. Something happens and we're off to the races immediately without
the obsession that sort of modern film has with origin stories. It's when you can't introduce a character unless you start at point A. It's like, oh, come on, that's not always the best way to tell a story. And yeah, we need a Conan story where Conan just walks in and breaks up whatever's going on. He steps in the door and things are different. And it's okay if like the audience or the wonders, if the audience wonders who he is and doesn't know how he fits into the story to start off with, that's good. Indeed, if you're looking back at People of the Black Circle, when Conan first appears, you can't even tell he's the protagonist. He's scary. He's like, So yeah, that would be great on film.
I feel like that's true to the nature of Conan too. We started off without knowing his origin when Howard first wrote him, and you don't really need to. I want to, again, circle back to that first story because we didn't talk about what it was like to have that published. Can you walk us through what happened after that?
Well, I finished it, and seriously, I thought, yay, it's done. I can't believe it, And then I was like, well, what now? And it seemed to me that there was a really good chance that I'd wasted my time. That, that basically I'd written this thing, and it was a bit more a form of therapy than anything else. I pleased myself and nobody else. And I thought, well, now that it's done, I should see if anybody cares to print it, but I didn't know what to do. So I asked around. I sent a letter to Glenn Lord, and he referred me to Conan Properties. And they said that, we get Conan fan fiction all the time, and we don't publish it. But since you finished your novel, Mr. Hocking, we'll take a look at it. And they took a look at it, and I got a letter by FedEx like 2 days later going, we want it, I know, I almost felt, seriously, dude, I can't even tell you, but I thought I almost fell down. I was like, really? What happens now? And then within like a year or so, it was a tore paperback with a ripping Ken Kelly cover.
That's so cool, man.
I know, it was surreal.
What was your writing process like?
Back then, I used everything. I was pretty new to word processing, so I used that some, but I actually wrote a lot on just notepads.
It seems like this might have just poured right out of your head, like out of the ether, like you were so inspired.
I would go that far. Like I said, it happened by accretion. It was sort of bits and pieces brought Emerald Lotus together. I'm kind of a structuralist, and I wanted the story to have some cohesion. I like a story with bones at the beginning, middle, and an end, and some foreshadowing, and And so I wanted it to hang together and build to a worthy climax. There are a few things I dislike more than an anti-climax, and so I really wanted it to build up to a big explosive conclusion. So bit by bit, it accumulated, and once I had like a plot laid out in my mind, I had a through line, like I'd write chronologically, like I finished chapter 3, now I'll begin writing chapter 4. But if I got bored of chapter 4, I'd go, I think there's another scene in chapter 19 that I feel like writing that now. And I'd write that, and then I'd put that in the file. And when I finally worked my way up to chapter 19, I'd rewrite it. I'd think, oh, that's pretty good, but I forgot about this, this, and this. Let's put those in now.
That's really cool. I always like to hear people's process. Let's talk about Conan again. But what defines Conan? What does Conan mean to you? How do you get into his psyche when you're writing him?
Conan is sort of the ultimate mythic warrior. Howard's writing sometimes would perhaps lend meaning to an uncaring universe. And there's a sort of darkness in a lot of his writing and reflected in his life and in most of his prose. And it seems to me that Conan, in character and as a creation, is sort of an answer to that. Conan is Conan regardless. He's going to be himself. He's going to strive. He's going to do the best he can with what he has. He's going to dominate whatever situation he can, and he's an answer to that in his own way. He will, as he spoke with Belit, he's going to live deep while he lives. Perhaps the universe is uncaring, but he doesn't care that the universe is uncaring. He's going to continue to be Conan and be himself and strive forward until death takes him. And there's something to be said for that, man. I mean, obviously, this is an idealized mythic version of human endeavor in the world. It sounds pretentious as hell, but you know what I mean.
I'm not the bravest person in the world. I have so much anxiety. I just have tremendous anxiety, and I feel like Conan is a person without anxiety.
Yeah, that's pretty much a safe bet. Because a lot is made of Conan's physical strength. If you took another guy and gave him Conan's body, he wouldn't be Conan. And conversely, if you took Conan and you stripped him of his strength, he'd still be Conan. His mind, his will, his self is strong enough is strong unto itself, and the muscles are there to do battle with giant snakes or whatever else happens along. But it's a mental thing as much as a physical thing, and while it is inspiring in your case, I mean, you're not like a trained warrior. You couldn't expect to whip out your scimitar and fend off this guy. So I mean, in some ways, Conan is inspiring, but I don't know. You're not necessarily supposed to go join the pirates and start raiding galleys. You got to draw the line somewhere. But as a sort of a mythic example of individuality, of freedom. I think there's some inspiration to be found there.
Yeah, I mean, if you tried to live exactly as Conan did, you'd be in jail pretty quick.
You'd really have your ass kicked really bad, really fast too.
Yeah, depending on your strength, but yeah, probably.
Again, Conan, it does feel fear, but he can control it. He I don't know, if you read like narratives of soldiers in combat, everybody's terrified, but there's those who can deal, those who can rise above. They're not fearless, because basically nobody who isn't insane is fearless. But it's controllable if you're the right kind of guy.
I like that. That's a good addition to that, because it's a good point. He does have fear, but it's controllable. So let's get into these questions. You may have kind of answered them already, but let's just do it again. What was it about the world of Conan that drew you back after your previous novel, Conan the Emerald Lotus? What new aspects of Conan's character the Hyborian Age did you want to explore this time around?
For the Living Plague, for one, I felt like I did have more stories about Conan to tell. And like I said, writing the Cimmerian was like a privilege and an honor, and it was a delight, man. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I wanted to do it some more. And again, I hope that some of the pleasure I felt writing about the Barbarian is there on the page for the reader to see, feel, enjoy with any luck. And for two, I wanted to put the Barbarian into a desperate situation that simply got worse. I wanted to take a cue from the horror yarns that appeared in Weird Tales magazine back in the day and sort of thrust Conan into a Lovecraftian nightmare and show how he prevails, because that's what Conan does.
The premise of Conan the Living Plague, with a wizard unleashing a monstrous creature, feels like a classic pulp setup. How did you go about putting your own spin on this tried and true formula to keep it fresh and surprising for readers?
Right on. It's classic pulp all the way. I tried to spin it by making the monstrous creature, first, it's an accident. Even its creators didn't expect or understand it, and then have it evolve into an ever more formidable and disturbing force of predatory evil. I don't want to lean into spoilers, but by having the plague become more sentient and begin to ponder its role in the world, what it is, where it is, what it's supposed to do, what's its destiny. I thought that was a little different. That felt fresh to me.
Well, what's really cool is it almost feels like everything was meant to be. I know this got delayed a long time, but then we had a real pandemic that happened. Do you feel like maybe this story has taken on kind of like a new perspective, having gone through COVID?
I don't know. The plague in the novel is like supernaturally lethal. And one In one interview, someone asked me, "Oh gosh, at one point, they wear like almost like masks to protect themselves from the plague. Don't you think that's kind of political?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I wrote this in 1997. How could I know? I'm not trying to advocate any political point of view here. It's just part of the story. So I don't know. I wonder if the fact that the villain is basically a living plague is going to resonate more with people now. Perhaps so. It's a good idea. Hope so.
Well, I had to bring it up because I thought it was interesting. And also, I feel like if there was a actual plague creature walking around, I'd probably put on a mask, but that's just me.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know if it is political at that point. Like, as an actual creature that's going to infect people. It's like, yeah, put on a mask. Be my guest. Don't put one on. That's fine, man. Have a good life. Conan is known for his physical prowess and skill as a warrior. But in this story, he seems to be facing more supernatural Lovecraftian horrors. How does this push Conan out of his comfort zone? And what new dimensions of his character does it allow for you to showcase?
Conan's physically mighty. Your average person, you ask him about Conan, the first thing they think about is muscles. But like I said, if you took another man and gave him Conan's body, that guy would not be Conan. If you stripped Conan of his physical strength, he'd still be Conan. Robert E. Howard pitted the Cimmerian against the unknowable Lovecraftian horrors with kind of a nod and a tip of the hat to his pen pal H.P. Lovecraft. I wanted to take the ball and as best I could and run with it, putting Conan into a situation where he is vastly outclassed physically by otherworldly horrors and showing us how he could still triumph. I mean, again, that's what Conan does. If you poke around that line, you're going to see, what if Conan fought the Witcher? What if Conan fought a Black Rider from Lord of the Rings? What if Conan fought Galactus? Who would win? Conan would win. The answer is always Conan. He prevails. That's what he does.
Man, Conan versus Galactus, that would have been cool.
He'd find a way.
Well, also, fun fact for anyone that's interested, Heroic Signatures, before we got sold to Funcom, this company that it almost got bought by the company that owns the rights to The Witcher.
Really?
Yeah, so Conan may have faced The Witcher at one point. Well, actually, by the way, I probably sound like an old grandma that knows nothing what I'm talking about because I've never played The Witcher. So I was just like, that's like talking about Pokemon and saying maybe he would fight the Pokemon. Yeah. Like, I don't Move on to this next question here. The city of Dulcine plays a major role in the story. What real-world inspirations, if any, did you draw upon in crafting this setting? How did you go about making the city feel like a living, breathing place with its own history and culture?
Okay, and this is going to take me back to that two-pronged conversation we had just moments ago. One of Howard's finest and maybe least recognized talents was filling out the background of his Hyborian age with brushstrokes, skilled little brushstrokes as the story rolled along. With Howard, narrative drives paramount, and one of the key attributes of sword and sorcery is that pacing, is that unfolding of the narrative. Things keep moving, things keep changing, things keep evolving. It holds your interest. But, again, you've seen the map. You've read the Hyborian Age essay, but you know what, man? You don't need either of those to get the sense of the Hyborian Age as this vast tapestry, of ancient civilizations and cultures and with histories. Our Howard managed that with, a kind of prose shorthand, colorful, vivid, often poetic touches that make the background come alive. Again, like I said before, most modern fantasy works hard on the world building, which can detail everything from the society's structure to royal bloodlines to schools of swordplay to architecture to shoe repair. When done by a master, this stuff is great. It's immersive as can be. You get your Tolkien, your Martin, and it pulls you in. One of its appeal is that it creates an alternate world that, like, if you were thrown into it, you'd know where to go to get the best burgers. I mean, it's real. It has like a separate existence. But I didn't feel like you could really stop the storyline. I didn't feel like you could even really. I did want to slow, for my own part. I did not want to slow my Conan pastiche down to lay out detailed background. I wanted to try to emulate Howard, and by trying to brush in these details as the story hurtled along. And that's what I tried to give it the impression of a living environment without slowing what I hoped was a headlong narrative.
Conan's mercenary companions are trapped alongside him in Dulcine's keep. Without giving too much away, what can you tell us about these characters and the group dynamics at play as they face the horrors within?
Yes, Conan's is in the story of Living Plague. Conan is a fresh recruit to a mercenary band in Shem, and he's been quickly selected to be part of a sort of a covert expedition into the plague-racked city of Dulcine. And no one's gone in there because if you go in there, you die of the plague, like pronto. So, but they found a way to go in, and they mean to go in there and loot the treasury. Now, so it's basically a men on mission story, as you got a variety of characters accompanying Conan on this little mission. I tried to create as much tension as I could between the characters. I mean, you get everybody from like the young, naive archer, Pazur, who thinks Conan's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You know, he looks up to him, it's kind of some hero worship, to Balthano, who's the wizard addressed as his servant, and he thinks the barbarian is overrated and arrogant and really wants to take him down a peg or two or three. He really wants to take him out. Adrastus himself, the wizard who's accompanying them on the he has a smooth veneer over a whole lot of duplicity. And, you know, you can't really trust this guy any which way. And the leader, the prince, who's basically, I guess he's funded and conceived of the whole expedition, you know, but he's a leader by virtue of his noble birth and is not really much of a leader at all. And he's swiftly out of his depth, and it just gets worse. His bodyguard, Shular, the Asuri warrior, he's duty bound to a fault. And this is a varied collection of characters. Most of them have their own agenda, and these personalities do not mesh terribly well, and that was my intention.
The story promises a mix of visceral action, supernatural dread, and cosmic horror. As a writer, how do you balance these different tones and elements to create a cohesive, impactful narrative?
First off, let's just say I did my best, but sword and sorcery stories have been described, and I think quite accurately, as historical swashbucklers fused with supernatural horror. Someone said Raphael Sabatini mixed with H.P. Lovecraft. So it's like the guy that wrote Seawolf and Captain Blood, those old Errol Flynn-style swashbucklers, mixed with Lovecraft straight-up cosmic horror. It's a blend that, if you stop and think about it, it seems kind of unlikely on its face, but obviously it can work really well. And each of those seems like a primal element of a Conan yarn, and each has to sort of be emphasized. Now, what I tried to do was give the reader a solid dose of straight-up swashbuckling, mano-a-mano battle action, and a separate dose of eerie, superstitious, supernatural dread. And then as the story develops, sort of blend the two together until all the elements are sort of stirred together in kind of a molten mass, so that by the end of it, it's, you know, that they're happening at the same time. So that's what I did in any case.
You mentioned undead creatures in Lovecraftian entities beyond mortal comprehension. How do you approach writing inhuman horrors in a way that makes them feel truly alien and terrifying while still grounding them in the world of Conan?
That is a craft question, and the answer to that, I think, is pretty simple. I try to set up the potential for unknowable, otherworldly horrors early on, because, you know, everybody knows that sorcerers of the Hyborian age sometimes traffic with entities that are not of this world. And I wanted to build toward a climax. So first Conan faces conflicts with human foes, and then, spoiler, I guess, non-human foes that he can confront much as he does human warriors, that is to say with fire and steel, and then building to greater and greater horrors of a truly, you know, alien supernatural nature. Reading Conan, I don't think anyone who sits down to read a Conan story is going to be shocked to find the Cimmerian confronted by the supernatural. I mean, that's kind of a given, sword and sorcery, after all. So it's not like having these kind of horrors in the Conan yard is going to snap any reader's delicate suspension of disbelief. But I wanted to work the narrative so that the reader would be more gradually drawn into the confrontations with the unnatural, I guess just like Conan is in the story. And so that by the climax, things have really gotten hugely and weirdly fearsome, and you've been brought up to it. Again, I hate an anticlimax, so building towards the meshing of all those elements.
The Shemite wizard's plan to create a lethal serum feels like a dark reflection of the sorceress in Emerald Lotus, who gained power from a deadly plant. Is this a deliberate thematic callback? And if so, what ideas are you exploring through this parallel?
That's a monstrous question, and I could wander off all over the place with this. In part, the sorceress horrors that the villains create or unleash are related, but the nature of the villains, the sorcerers themselves, are actually more related. I don't know. Maybe I was a little bit tired of wizards who could, summon storms by waving their arm. And so I made both of these characters uncertain of themselves and without a whole lot in the way of fame or magical skill. These guys are not Thothamon. They're not Thulsa Doom. The Emerald Lotus is an otherworldly drug, enhances a wizard's skill, but it's got a terrible price. While the parallels with drug addiction have been drawn by readers who have both approved of it and disapproved of the whole idea, the Lotus this is important to me to get this across. The Lotus is less a stand-in for literal drug use than it is for allowing oneself to slip into mindless egocentricity, narcissism, self-delusion, self-indulgence. On the other hand, the living plague is literally a weapon gone rogue, come alive and independent and possessed of its own agenda, which, being a lethal disease, involves killing a whole lot of people. The wizard who accidentally helps unleash it, that's Adrastus in Conan the Living Plague, he was never a terribly nice fellow in the first place, but he's tempted by the sense that he might be able to control the plague, and through sheer hubris and narcissism akin to Ethramfal's, ignores all the horror he has wrought. He's basically wiped out a city. He said, but, if it empowers me, that's okay. He's been in an attempt to make himself the kind of wizard, the kind of power he's always wanted to be. He's willing to commit these horrors. He's willing to take these risks. It sounds straight up pretentious, but I think you can see my understanding of human evil in those two characters. Sorry, man, was that too much?
No, dude, not at all. I stopped and paused because I'm just thinking about it, and it feels like I'm like, oh, and it almost feels like any one of us, any person could go down that path and become that character.
Well, the temptations of power are right there, and and so I don't know. You ask later on. I think there's a question you wanted to pose about the corruption of power and how power can corrupt. And I think there's the temptation right there. Both of these characters, well, Ethramfal basically forsakes his entire humanity, in the quest of power, and whereas Adrastus is willing to sacrifice just about anything and everybody in order to get a hold of it.
Robert E. Howard's original Conan stories often grappled with weighty themes of civilization versus barbarism, the corrupting influence of power, and mankind's place in an uncaring universe. Do any of these classic Howard themes come into play in Conan the Living Plague? And if so, how do you approach them?
Oh, man. Of course, I don't think it's possible to write a Conan pastiche without addressing those concepts to some extent. They're integral to Howard's saga. That's what Conan's, that they're intimately involved in the very nature of the Conan saga. I don't lean into the whole barbarism versus civilization thing as a trope as hard as Howard could, like you see in Beyond the Black River, where Howard basically just lays it right down for you, man, right in your face. But it's visible all the same. Conan manifests the best of humanity outside of the confines and conflicts and affectations of the civilized world. The ostensible leader of the expedition in Conan the Living Plague, Prince Yorick, is as unsuited for that job as I'd be for Olympic pole vaulting. He thinks he can do it. He's been told he can do it. He's by right of his status in civilization, he should be a leader, and yet he can't really do it. Whereas Conan, bluntly honest and unencumbered by all those pretensions and affectations of that are part of being a civilized leader, performs naturally and with skill. We already went over. I jumped ahead a little bit for this one because I gave some thought to the whole mankind in an uncaring universe. Man, that's weighty stuff. But I see Conan's very nature as his creator's vision of a response to that kind of a universe. Howard created a character whose independence and insistence on freedom and self-determination make him both a character and an approach to living. A kind of, in just being Conan, it's an act of defiance against a universe and a world that can and does strip people of purpose, of individuality, of self, and of hope. Conan is Conan, and he means to live his own life and his own way and make of himself what he can. Conan will, like the conversation he had with Bullet, he'll live deep while he lives, and the universe can be uncaring, And the hell with it. He doesn't care. In Living Plague, Conan strives for riches. He follows his barbaric code of honor. He confronts those he thinks deserve it. He casually offers great rewards to a loyal comrade. And he's his own man. Conan's going to be Conan, and only death is going to stop him from doing that.
Well, Conan's a self-made man.
Yeah.
It kind of relates to you. You took your destiny in your own hands, and you wrote something without anyone coming to you, and you made it happen just because that was your will. So in some ways, Conan is reflected in John C. Hocking, at least that element of it.
Well, okay, on one hand, that's flattering, on the other, it's ridiculous. But yeah, I seized the moment and followed through and wrote my Conan story. So yeah.
Yeah, hey, no one came to you asking for a Conan story. You did it. I think you deserve that win, man. That was great. What do you hope readers will take away from this story? And what aspects of Conan's character, his world, or themes that you've explored do you think will resonate most strongly with fans both old and new?
Look, man, it's a pastiche, okay? It's an attempt to focus and broadcast my love of Howard's work in general and Conan in particular. I hope the book will seize the reader's attention and provide some thrills and some chills and maybe a few moments that move or shake the emotions. I hope the readers familiar with Conan will get a kick out of the story and the way I tell it. That they can see it as a mirror reflecting some of Howard's fire. I hope that readers who are less familiar with Conan will feel my enthusiasm for the material, and it will make them want to read more Conan and maybe explore Robert E. Howard's other works. Okay, having read virtually all Conan pastiche and read all the Conan comics, all of them, I felt the urge to tell my own Conan story. I wanted to give that a spin. And I did bit by bit, initially with Conan the Emerald Lotus, playing it as a kind of a mental game where I assembled bits and pieces and tried to think it through as if, again, like, where in Conan's life would I set this? What kind of a menace would Conan be up against? Who would accompany him? Who would he meet? Who would he encounter? What kind of conflicts would be there? And just playing with those ideas, I jotted down ideas and ended up with an outline and wrote bits and pieces of it. I didn't really pursue it seriously as like I think of myself as. I didn't think of myself as writing a Conan novel that anyone else would read for some time, until it started to shape up. Once I had a finished outline and I was following it through, I started, I'm writing an entire book. And when it was done, I had to decide what I was going to do with it. And I probed around trying to see if there was anything I could do with it, because I didn't, like I've said before, I didn't want to just drop it in a drawer and write it off as therapy. I thought, I had a good time writing this. There's Conan pastiche being published. Maybe it can get published. Who knows? It's worth a try. Better than just abandoning the damn thing. So I poked around. I wrote letters hither and thither and yon. Finally, I wrote one to Glenn Lord, who handled the Howard estate at the time. And he sent me the address of Conan Properties. I sent them a note saying, "Hey, you don't know me? Nobody does. I wrote a Conan novel, and it took a couple years. I worked hard on it. Can I submit it for publication?" And they wrote back saying, "Well, no. we get an awful lot of fan fiction, and we don't really. It does not get published." And I said, "But since you clearly have finished an entire novel, send it to us, and we'll take a look." And they got back to me in short order, which left me astounded. I worked with them. Then Conan the Emerald Lotus came out in 1995 in a really cool trade paperback. And Cyril Cabral did the cover of the paperback. It's a good cover. I think it might be his first. And then was reissued in, I think, 99 in a mass market pocketbook with a cool cover by Ken Kelly. After it was accepted, I was sort of gently encouraged, said, "Do you want to write some more? Can you write some more?" And of course, while I was writing it, I was sort of imagining, well, what would Conan do after the Emerald Lotus goes down? Did he have other plans? And I ended up thinking of, I plotted out, I believe, 6 novels. I wrote the second one, Conan and the Living Plague, reasonably certain that I could submit it. I knew they would look at it, having purchased Conan and the Emerald Lotus and brought it into print. I knew they would check it out. I wasn't certain they were going to like it. And it took about 2 years to write that one as well. But I was fired up writing Living Plague because I'd succeeded, and I realized that I could take Conan in directions that I really wanted to. Now I could do things with the character. And that was accepted for publication in 97. And then the character was sold, and no pastiche was forthcoming. Sat on it for a good long time. Straight up, I while waiting, I got about halfway through a third. But then I abandoned it because there was just really no point in continuing to write about this character. And now, pushing 27 years later, I'm finally seeing, check it out, Living Plague lives. I honestly, dude, I did not think this day would come. And here it is.
Well, you talked about those 4 novels that you had plotted out and that third that you had started writing. What can you tease about those ideas or those concepts?
Well, I haven't worked on them in some long time, as you might well imagine.
Well, were they all connected?
Oh, absolutely. When I first conceived of writing about Conan as like a mercenary and chum, I thought, well, there's about a year of Conan's life, give or take. The way I looked at it back then, before Conan's life had been more systematized, I figured there was about a year nobody had touched, and I thought, hey, that's my year. I'll do what I want with that one. And so Conan is a mercenary and chum for that year, but I had him do all kinds of different stuff. There's heavens, that I had this almost Maltese Falcon like noir adventure. I had a Lovecraftian apocalypse story. I had a bunch of fun stuff. The one that follows it would take Conan to Sabatia, the city of that's a dark and scary place where all the Sabatian torturers come from. Because I realized that no one ever said a story in Sabatia. And at the time, no one had, although I think Roy Thomas said a couple of stories in Sabatia when he was writing for his second run on Savage Sword. So there was some comics that were set there, but I don't think any pastiche took place there. So I was having a riot writing about Conan, but that came to an end for a good long time.
Let's talk about Sprague real quick. I know it's kind of controversial for Conan fans. Everyone seems to have a very strong opinion. But that was a significant chunk of Conan's history, was Sprague DeCamp and Lynn Carter and Glenn Lord. Can you talk about those 3? Did you have any interaction with Sprague at all?
Yeah, I did. I interacted with Sprague several times, and he was always really gentlemanly. This will go a way towards explaining how naive and ridiculous I was in the beginning. But once that Emerald Lotus was accepted, I got like a phone call from Sprague, who was gentleman, they're all like remarkably formal and gentlemanly. And I was like, hey, I'm so delighted that you guys like it and that you're willing to print it. You can have it. I'll just throw up my hands. I don't take it away. Do whatever you want. And he was like, we can't do that. That would be wrong. And so he made sure that, I don't know if it was even possible, for what I had said, but I was just that silly. He treated me fine. I understand that he's taken to task for any number of reasons, and I think I understand. But clinging to those reasons now, especially since the Conan Pure Text stuff, the remastered Robert E. Howard works are available, seems like, I don't know, kind of staring into the past a little too hard. Most of the stuff he did, the Conanizations and whatnot of Howard's non-Conan stories into Conan stories, we're not going to see those again. Those are gone. Last time those were available was 25 years ago. I don't think we're ever going to see them again. I'll let them go. And plus, they made great issues of Savage Sword. So am I supposed to? I can't grumble about them over much.
I mean, hey, call it fan fiction, whatever you want. I like some of his ideas. For instance, The Black Stranger, classic pirate adventure with Conan, published posthumously. Sprague DeCamp edited that story so that the treasure that Conan finds at the end of it goes on to help him fund his campaign to become king of Aquilonia. Little things like that. I know that's going to piss off a lot of fans. But I'm like, yeah, that's a cool idea. I like that.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
He gets flack basically for presenting the Conan stories in chronological order. And of all the objections to his work with and influence on the Conan saga, that one doesn't resound with me too strongly. Especially if you'd never heard of Conan. And it seemed like an ideal way to introduce the character. Follow him from his early adventures and then watch him evolve over the course of the stories. That just seems like kind of a natural. I prefer to read them in the order in which Howard wrote them, but I understand why that was like a natural decision. It doesn't seem that strange to me. Yet there are those who really object to that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand all of that as well. I feel like we're in a golden era for Conan right now because Heroic Signatures is so willing to explore. And
I mean, one more thing about the current era of Conan. As a guy that has been reading Conan since like 1967, I mean, I've seen Conan rise up in popularity and then fade almost completely away. If you had told me like 10 years ago that Conan would be taking off the way he is now, I never thought this would happen again. I mean, the character is, it doesn't necessarily fit with a lot of modern mores and tastes in entertainment. And yet, we get the Titan comic, which blew up. I mean, it went through more printings than you would ever expect. I don't know how many comics go through 4 or 5 printings. That first issue just kept going. And people have a very positive attitude toward it. They admire the work. And then the next thing you know, we've got Savage Sword in the same format that it was in 1977. With the same, I mean, seriously, if you traveled time and tossed, the latest issue of Savage Sword on the desk of someone who read Conan and back then, they wouldn't hardly be able to tell the difference. They might notice the price, but that's about it. It looks and feels the same. Dude, I never, ever would have imagined that Conan would have come back this hard, this strong. It's wonderful. It's profoundly gratifying. I think a lot of that could be laid at the feet of Jim Zub, just because because of his knowledgeability about the character and the era, and his ability to sort of translate the best of the old comics into a modern format, aided by the artists and whatnot. But I'm astounded by it, and of course the cherry on the top of it is after 27 years, I never thought I'd see that. So it's cool to see Conan making a comeback and so forcefully. I hope it continues, man. I hope it just keeps coming.
Me too, man. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. It was incredible talking to you, man.
Take care of yourself, brother.
John C. Hocking, City of the Dead, June 18. Before you go, hang on a second. We've got a new lore video coming out at the end of this month on the Hyborian Age and the secondary world created by Robert E. Howard. We have podcast with Christy Marks, the creator of the Conan animated series from the 90s. We're going to get into the backstory. She's going to reveal things about that she's never talked about. It's going to be really great. Christy Marks. We've got Doug Braithwaite coming up, Mark Finn. So guys, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Instagram. Check out Conan.com for some amazing blog content. Happy Father's Day. So many people were introduced to Conan by their fathers, and I'm no exception to that. So here's to all the fathers out there. I'm Sean Curley. Crawl back for more next time.